George Groves has been given a 10-day deadline to prove that he's fit to face Callum Smith in the World Boxing Super Series. If he can't prove that he's fit enough in 10 days, then he will be replaced. And at the moment, the leading candidate to replace him is the man he beat in the semi-finals, Chris Eubank Jr. Now, the fans, I guess you could say the hardcore boxing fans, have mostly reacted angrily to this news. They're saying that without George Groves in the final, the whole tournament is a joke. This is what they're saying. They're saying that the organizers of the World Boxing Super Series should delay the final. They should push it back however long, however far they need to push it back in order to accommodate George Groves. Now, if this was a one-off tournament, I would wholeheartedly agree. If it was a one-off tournament, they absolutely should push the final back as far as they need to in order to accommodate George Groves. 100%. But this is not a one-off tournament. This is a reoccurring yearly tournament. And because it's a reoccurring yearly tournament, they have to stick to a tight schedule. The whole point of this tournament was that it would be regimented in order to build the brand, so that when fans tune in to the World Boxing Super Series, they know that they can expect back-to-back weekends of fights. They know the main event's going to start at 10 o'clock. They know that there's a season for the World Boxing Super Series, which roughly follows the football season, or what in the United States people call soccer. It roughly follows the same months from September all the way through to May, June. This is the concept. This is why the World Boxing Super Series was created. They looked at previous tournaments like the Super 6 tournament. One of the biggest criticisms of the Super 6 tournament was that it took too long to complete. It took, I think, over 2 years because of injuries and pullouts and, rescheduling fights and all this kind of stuff. So the organizers of the World Boxing Super Series looked at that tournament and they said, we don't want to make the same mistakes as that tournament. And it's not going to be a one-off tournament. We want to build a brand here. So scheduling is absolutely crucial. This is why in the World Boxing Super Series, they had a whole heap of fighters on standby who were signed up before the tournament even started. Substitutes who were already signed up. When Jürgen Bremer pulled out of the Callum Smith fight, they already had that Holskin guy called Holskin. They already had him lined up. And he replaced Bremer within 24 or 48 hours? That is the kind of organization that they're going for. They're trying to be extremely organized and stick to a schedule. As Kalle Sauerland said in a recent interview, they can't push back the finals so far that it overlaps with the start of the new season. That's ridiculous. And so that's the danger of pushing the final back to accommodate George Groves. It might overlap with the new season starting. And the finals are always supposed to be around the same time every year. This is to build the brand. When you have a set routine and a set pattern and a set schedule, a regiment, it's easier to build a brand around that than when the fights are scattered all over the place and it's all random. Yeah? If you have a schedule, it's easier to build a brand. It's easier to build a following than if you don't have a schedule. So I understand the position that the World Boxing Super Series are coming from, and I support their decision. If George Groves ain't ready in 10 days, replace him. It's for the good of the tournament. And people are saying, oh, the whole tournament's a joke. Is it? Look, the super middleweight version of this tournament only had one world champion in it from the start. The other champions, Ramirez, De Gale, Benavidez, they're not in the tournament. So, the credibility of the super middleweight version of the tournament was in question from the beginning. The point is, Rome wasn't built in a day. There are going to be pullouts. There are going to be teething problems. But you just keep pushing forward and you work on the successes. I mean, just look at the fights that have happened in the World Boxing Super Series and ask yourself, would those fights have happened if it wasn't for this tournament? Particularly with the cruiserweights. They've got all the belts in the cruiserweight version of the tournament. Look at the fights that happened. How many of those fights would have happened if it wasn't for the World Boxing Super Series? Very few of them would have happened. I'm telling you now, very few of them. And with the super middleweight version of the tournament, maybe some of those fights could have happened. All right, but Eubank and Groves would have been a difficult fight to make probably if it wasn't for that tournament. And that's a fight a lot of people wanted to see. It turned out to be not overly competitive in the end, but it's still a fight a lot of people wanted to see, and you probably wouldn't have got to see it if it weren't for this tournament. So yeah, there are going to be teething problems, but just look who's signed up already for the bantamweight version of the tournament. You've got Zolani Tete and Ryan Burnett. Now that fight was looking like it was never going to happen between those two, with Ryan Burnett being with Eddie Hearn and Zolani Tete being with Frank Warren. It was looking like it was never going to happen. But now they've both signed up to the tournament, it's looking far more likely. So the tournament is not perfect. But if they stick to their guns and they stick to their scheduling, I think it's going to grow into something, or it has the potential to grow into something really special. But they can't delay finals, indefinitely until it's overlapping into the next season just to accommodate one fighter. As they've said before, no fighter is bigger than the tournament. They're trying to build a brand here. It's not just about the fighters, it's about the brand. Right? And in the grand scheme of things, let's say the World Boxing Super Series becomes a success over the next, 3, 4, 5 years. In the grand scheme of things, nobody's going to look back and say, oh, the whole thing's a load of rubbish because George Groves wasn't in the final of the first season. No one's going to say that. Yeah? They're going to get an undisputed cruiserweight champion. They might get an undisputed champion in some of the following seasons. Are people going to look back and say, oh, well, Groves wasn't in the final of the super middleweight first season. Oh, the whole thing's terrible. It's ridiculous. Yeah? World Boxing Super Series is a long-term project. It's not a short-term project. It's a long-term project. That's what people have to understand. The tournament, the project does not revolve around George Groves. And I like George Groves. I want to see him in the final. He deserves to be in the final. But he's not bigger than the tournament itself. Yeah? So if they have to replace him, they have to replace him. As far as, getting someone from outside the tournament to come in and replace George Groves, like another one of the champions, that would be good. That would be good for the credibility of the final. It would be good if they could get a Billy Joe Saunders from middleweight, or they could get one of the super middleweight champions like De Gale, Gilberto Ramirez, or Benavidez. It'd be good if they could get one of those guys. But from a logistical point of view, because remember, the World Boxing Super Series is about scheduling. From a logistical point of view, how realistic is it that they'll be able to get one of those other champions in within the next 10 days? Paperwork sorted out, legal things sorted out, because, bringing in a champion from outside of the tournament into the tournament, it means they're going to have to sort out negotiations as far as money. They're going to have to sort out negotiations as far as the television network, their promoter, and they have to make sure that the fighter can actually be ready in time to fight in the final. And in terms of the narrative, this is something Kalle Sauerland has said, in terms of the narrative, in terms of the story of the World Boxing Super Series, he'd prefer to pick a replacement from within the tournament. That's what he'd prefer, because it fits in with a narrative. There's a story behind it. And that's why they're looking at Eubank Jr., not just because he's a name and he's going to draw a crowd, but because there's a narrative there. Now, the winner of the World Boxing Super Series, whether it's, let's say Groves can't make it to the final, and it's Eubank versus Callum Smith. The winner, especially if it's Callum Smith, there's a very good chance he's going to fight George Groves anyway. There's a very good chance he's going to fight one of the other champions anyway. The World Boxing Super Series Super Middleweight first season hasn't produced any champions. George Groves was a champion going in, and he'll be a champion going out. All right? So all they're trying to get to is the Ali Trophy. And yeah, the Super Middleweight version was not deep with talent. The Cruiserweight version was, Super Middleweight version wasn't. But it's about just sticking to the schedule. And things will fall into place if you stick to the schedule, you stick to the format, put one foot in front of the other, you'll get there eventually. And it's no surprise to me that in this second season, they've got world champions like Zolani Tete and Ryan Burnett signing up. Because of the kind of money that these fighters are being paid to enter this tournament. And the longer the tournament goes, hopefully you're going to get even more champions wanting to sign up. Because one of the things that this tournament does is it removes a lot of the politics when it comes to making fights. Because it's a tournament format, you've all signed up, you've all done the paperwork before you enter the tournament. So fights happen. You understand? There's no politics behind it. The fights is just going to happen. If it weren't in a tournament format, you got to wait months and there's back and forth and who's ducking who and all this kind of rubbish. In a tournament, none of that. You go in there, whoever you get drawn against, you fight. Whoever gets through to the next round, you fight. Whoever gets through to the final, you fight. There's no cherry picking or umming and ahhing. And the only potential cherry picking is in when you're one of the seeded boxers and you get to pick who you fight in the first round. But even that is a very limited pool of fighters, you know, and if it's a strong pool of fighters, and there are really no cherries, like in the Cruiserweight tournament, there was really no cherries to pick, other than maybe Marco Huck for Usyk in the first round. But other than that, there were tough fights all round. So I support the concept of the tournament, and I support their decision to replace George Groves if they have to. Again, I hope George Groves is ready in time. He posted an Instagram video here of him hitting the pads. He's got some kind of, I don't know what this is around his body, but and he looks quite heavy here, George Groves. So obviously I want to see George Groves in the final. He deserves to be in the final. I'd love to see him fight Callum Smith, but I just support the concept of nobody being bigger than the tournament. And looking at the big picture, looking at the long-term goal. It's a long-term project. You understand? So I support that, and I support what the World Boxing Super Series are trying to do here. So anyway, I'm sure many, if not most of you, disagree with me, and you think that the World Boxing Super Series, to hell with their scheduling, to hell with all the good fights they've already put on, to hell with all the fights that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for this tournament, to hell with all that, to hell with their long-term goal. If George Groves ain't in the final, the entire tournament is trash. I'm sure some of you are going to be coming from that, you know, point of view. As long as you don't try and insult me or anything like that, it's all good. Say whatever you want to say. A lot of the people who have been getting blocked lately are people who are trying to come at me sideways. Insult me. You know what I mean? Don't come on here with no personal insults, and just don't do it. You will get blocked. All right? If you want to disagree, cool, disagree. But yeah. Anyway, let me know how you feel, people. It's happening. I'm out.